My brother didn't just steal my inheritance. He stole my father's legacy, forged his signature on legal documents, and then looked me in the eye and told me I was never meant to have any of it. For 6 months I believed him, until I found the original will hidden in a place he never thought to look. My name is Marcus, and this is the story of how my older brother David destroyed our family business, betrayed our father's memory, and tried to erase me from everything we'd built together. But what he didn't count on was that I knew my father better than he ever did, and I knew exactly where he would hide the truth. It started on a Monday morning in late April. I was at the office early, going over quarterly reports, when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. "Marcus, you need to come to the hospital. Now! It's your father." I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my keys and drove. The entire way there, my mind was racing. Dad had been complaining about chest pain for weeks, but he'd refused to see a doctor. He was stubborn like that, always pushing through, always convinced he was fine. But he wasn't fine. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. Massive heart attack. The doctor said he was dead before the ambulance even arrived. I stood in that sterile hospital hallway staring at the floor, unable to process what I'd just been told. My father, the man who'd built a multi-million-dollar construction company from nothing, who'd worked 16-hour days for 40 years, who'd taught me everything I knew about business and integrity, was gone, just like that. David arrived 20 minutes later. He walked in with his wife, Elena, both of them dressed like they'd just come from a business meeting, which, knowing David, they probably had. He didn't cry. He didn't break down. He just stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, nodding as the doctor explained what had happened. When the doctor left, David turned to me. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" I asked, still numb. "About the business. About what happens next." I stared at him. Our father had been dead for less than an hour, and David was already talking about business. "Can we do this later?" I said quietly. "No," he replied. "We can't. There are decisions that need to be made immediately. The company doesn't stop just because Dad's gone." I wanted to punch him, but I was too exhausted, too shattered. So I just nodded and followed him to a quiet corner of the waiting room. David pulled out his phone and started scrolling through emails. "I've already contacted our attorney," he said. "We need to review Dad's will and figure out the transition plan." "You contacted the attorney already?" I asked, incredulous. He looked at me like I was an idiot. "Of course I did. Someone has to handle this, Marcus, and clearly it's not going to be you." I felt a flash of anger, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't the time. Not here. Not now. Over the next few days, I was too consumed with grief to think clearly. The funeral was a blur. Hundreds of people showed up. Employees, clients, friends, family. Everyone had a story about my father, about his generosity, his work ethic, his loyalty. I gave a eulogy. I don't remember what I said. I just remember standing at that podium, looking out at the sea of faces and feeling completely hollow. David spoke too. His speech was polished, rehearsed. He talked about carrying on Dad's legacy, about honoring his vision, about ensuring the company continued to thrive. It sounded good, but something about it felt wrong. After the funeral, David called a family meeting. Just him, me, our mother, and the family attorney, Richard. We gathered in Dad's home office, the same room where he'd spent countless late nights working on bids, reviewing contracts, planning the future of the company he'd built with his own hands. Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Your father's will is straightforward," he said. "The company is to be divided equally between his two sons, David and Marcus. 50-50 ownership. Your mother retains a 20% advisory stake but no voting power. The house and all personal assets go to your mother." I felt a wave of relief. 50-50, equal partners, just like Dad had always promised. But then I looked at David, and his expression was completely neutral. Too neutral. Richard continued. "However, there is a provision. The will states that David, as the elder son, will serve as acting CEO for the first year to ensure stability during the transition. After that, both brothers will have equal say in all major decisions. I nodded. That made sense. David had been with the company longer. He had more experience in operations. I was fine with him taking the lead for a year. Any questions? Richard asked. No, I said. David shook his head. Good, Richard said. I'll file the paperwork with the court. The estate should clear probate within 6 months. We shook hands. Richard left. And that's when everything started to unravel. The next morning I arrived at the office at 7 a.m., like I always did. But when I swiped my keycard, the reader blinked red. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. I pulled out my phone and called David. He answered on the first ring. Marcus, he said, his voice cold, we need to talk. I'm at the office. My keycard isn't working. I know, I had your access revoked. I froze. What? Come to my office. We'll discuss it there. He hung up. I stood there in the parking lot, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. When I finally made it inside through the visitor entrance, I walked straight to David's office. He was sitting behind Dad's desk, our father's desk, the one he'd custom-built 30 years ago. David had moved in. Literally, all of Dad's personal items were gone, replaced with David's things, his photos, his awards, his diplomas. What the hell is going on? I demanded. David leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Sit down, Marcus. I don't want to sit down. I want to know why my access was revoked. He sighed, like I was being unreasonable. Because you're no longer employed here. The words didn't register at first. What are you talking about? You're fired, he said simply. Effective immediately. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but his expression didn't change. You can't fire me, I said slowly. I own half this company. David smiled, a cold, calculating smile. Actually, you don't. He opened a drawer and pulled out a document. He slid it across the desk. This is Dad's will, the real one, updated 3 months before he died. It leaves the entire company to me. You get nothing. I picked up the document with shaking hands. It looked official, letterhead, legal language, and at the bottom my father's signature. But something was off. I'd seen my father sign documents 1,000 times. This signature was close, but it wasn't right. The loop on the J in his middle name was too wide. The slant was wrong. This is fake, I said quietly. David's smile widened. Prove it. I looked up at him, and in that moment, I saw a stranger. This wasn't my brother. This was someone I didn't know. Someone capable of things I'd never imagined. Why are you doing this? I asked. Because I can, he said. Because I've been doing the real work around here for years, while you coasted on Dad's goodwill. Because I deserve this company. And you don't. I stood up, the document still in my hand. I'm going to fight this. Go ahead, he said. But you should know I've already spoken to the board. They're all on my side. I've locked down the financials. And I've retained the best estate attorney in the state. You're going to lose, Marcus. Save yourself the embarrassment and walk away. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked out. As I left the building, I felt dozens of eyes on me, employees watching, whispering. David had already told them. I was out. Over the next few weeks, I tried to build a case. I hired a lawyer, a good one, but she was honest with me from the start. Without the original will, this is going to be nearly impossible to prove, she said. If your brother filed this version with the probate court and it's been accepted, the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate fraud, and that requires hard evidence. The signature is forged, I insisted. Then we'll need a handwriting expert, and even then, it's not a guarantee. Signatures can vary, especially if your father was in declining health. I felt helpless. David had thought of everything. He'd covered his tracks. And without access to the company, without any leverage, I had no way to find proof. My mother was no help. She was still grieving, barely functional. When I tried to explain what was happening, she just shook her head. I can't deal with this right now, Marcus. You boys need to figure it out. I tried reaching out to employees, people who'd worked with Dad for decades, but David had gotten to them first. He'd told them I was causing trouble. that I was trying to undermine the company, that I was unstable. One by one, they stopped returning my calls. I was completely isolated. Months passed. I burned through my savings paying legal fees. My lawyer kept hitting dead ends. The probate court had accepted David's version of the will, and without concrete proof of forgery, there was nothing we could do. I started to lose hope, started to believe that maybe David had won, that maybe I really was going to lose everything. But then I remembered something, a conversation I'd had with my father years ago. We'd been in his office late one night, just the two of us. He'd been telling me about the early days of the company, about the struggles, the close calls, the times he'd almost lost everything. I learned something important back then, he'd said. Always have a backup plan. Always keep copies of the most important documents somewhere safe, somewhere only you know about. At the time, I'd thought he was just being paranoid. But now, I wondered, if Dad had learned to keep backups, where would he hide them? It took me 3 days of searching. I went through every file cabinet in his home office, every drawer, every box in the attic. Nothing. Then I remembered the workshop. Dad had a small workshop in the garage. He'd built it himself when I was a kid. It was his sanctuary, the place he went to think, to work with his hands, to escape. I hadn't been in there since he died. When I opened the door, everything was exactly as he'd left it. Tools hanging on the walls, half-finished projects on the workbench, the smell of sawdust and motor oil. I started searching, methodically, carefully, and then I found it. Behind a false panel in the back wall, hidden inside a metal box, were copies of every important document my father had ever signed, including his will, the real one, dated 6 months before he died, witnessed, notarized, and it said exactly what Richard had told us, 50-50 ownership, equal partners. I stood there in that dusty workshop, holding the document, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. The next morning I called my lawyer. I found it, I said, the original will. She was at my house within an hour. We went over every detail, compared it to the version David had filed. The differences were undeniable. This is it, she said. This is what we need. We file a motion to reopen the probate case, present this as evidence, and we demand a handwriting analysis of both documents. How long will that take? I asked. Months, maybe longer, but we have a real shot now. We filed the motion the next day. David's response came 48 hours later. He denied everything, claimed my document was the forgery, accused me of fabricating evidence. But he couldn't explain why his version had no witness signatures, why the notary seal was suspiciously faint, why the paper stock was different from every other legal document Dad had ever signed. The court ordered a forensic examination, 3 experts, handwriting analysis, paper dating, ink composition. It took 4 months, 4 agonizing months of waiting, of wondering, of second-guessing, and then the results came back. David's will was a forgery. The signature had been traced. The document had been created using a desktop printer, not the law office's professional printing system, and the paper was purchased from a common office supply store 3 weeks after Dad died. The evidence was irrefutable. The judge was furious. She revoked the fraudulent will immediately, reinstated the original, and referred David's case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. I sat in that courtroom, watching my brother's face turn white as the judge read the findings. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in his eyes. After the hearing, David tried to approach me in the hallway. "Marcus, wait," he said. I stopped, turned, looked at him. "We can work this out," he said desperately. "We can split the company, go back to how it was supposed to be." I stepped closer. "You forged our father's signature," I said quietly. "You stole his company. You fired me. You turned everyone against me. You tried to erase me from his legacy." "I made a mistake," he said. "I was under pressure. I wasn't thinking clearly." "No," I said. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and you would have gotten away with it if Dad hadn't been smarter than both of us." I walked away. I didn't look back. The legal fallout was swift. David was charged with forgery and fraud. He pleaded guilty to avoid prison time. Part of his plea deal required him to surrender all claims to the company and pay restitution for the legal fees I'd incurred. The board voted unanimously to remove him from all positions, and just like that, the company was mine. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt hollow, because I'd lost my brother in the process, and I'd learned a truth I wish I'd never had to face. People will betray you for money, even family, especially family. I rebuilt the company over the next 2 years, hired new leadership, restored relationships with clients David had damaged, brought back employees he'd forced out, and slowly, painfully, I turned things around. My mother eventually came to terms with what had happened. She was devastated, ashamed. She couldn't believe her own son had done something so terrible. She apologized to me over and over, but I told her she didn't need to. None of this was her fault. David never reached out, not to apologize, not to explain. He just disappeared. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state, changed careers, started over. Maybe that's for the best. I think about my father often, about the lessons he taught me, about integrity, about doing the right thing even when it's hard, about always having a backup plan. He saved me, even after he was gone. And I've made it my mission to honor his memory by running this company the way he would have wanted, with honesty, with fairness, with respect for every person who works here. The scar from this experience will never fully heal, but it taught me something important. Family isn't just blood, it's trust, it's loyalty, it's showing up when things get hard. And when those things break, sometimes the best thing you can do is let go and move forward. If you've ever been betrayed by a sibling, if you've ever had someone try to steal what's rightfully yours, if you've ever had to fight for justice against impossible odds, I want you to know something. You're not alone. And the truth always finds a way to surface. It might take time. It might require a fight. But justice is worth pursuing. Have you experienced something like this? Has a family member ever betrayed you for money or power? Share your story in the comments. Because the more we talk about these experiences, the more we realize we're not fighting alone. But let me take you back, because there's a part of this story I haven't told you yet, a part that made everything even worse, a part that showed me just how calculated David's betrayal really was. It started about 2 weeks after he fired me. I was still reeling, still trying to figure out my next move, when I got a call from Janet. Janet had been my father's executive assistant for 23 years. She'd watched David and me grow up. She'd been at every company event, every holiday party, every major milestone. She was family. "Marcus," she said, her voice low and urgent, "we need to talk, but not over the phone. Can you meet me?" We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, somewhere David would never think to look. Janet looked exhausted, older than I'd ever seen her. She slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, communications between David and a lawyer named Thomas Brennan. The emails dated back 8 months, long before Dad died. I started reading, and with each line, my blood ran colder. David had been planning this for months. The emails showed him asking Brennan about the legal process for contesting a will, about how to establish sole ownership of a family business, about forging documents. Brennan had advised him, step by step, how to create a convincing forgery, how to backdate documents, how to manufacture a paper trail that would hold up in probate court. "Where did you get these?" I asked Janet. She looked away. I shouldn't have access to them, but David's been sloppy. He uses the company server for everything. I found them by accident when I was backing up files. When I realized what they were, I knew I had to tell you. I stared at the emails, my hands shaking. He planned this. While Dad was still alive, he was waiting for him to die. Janet nodded, tears in her eyes. "Your father trusted him, Marcus. David sat in meetings with him, smiled, acted like the perfect son. And the whole time, he was plotting to steal everything." I felt sick. "Does anyone else know about this?" She shook her head. "Just me, and I'm putting my job on the line by showing you. David has been watching everyone closely. Anyone who questions him gets pushed out. I've seen 3 people fired in the past 2 weeks for asking the wrong questions. Thank you, I said quietly, for taking this risk. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your father was a good man. What David's doing is wrong. Someone has to stop him. I took the emails to my lawyer immediately. She read through them, her expression growing darker with each page. This is premeditation, she said. This isn't just forgery. This is conspiracy to commit fraud. If we can authenticate these emails, we have him. How do we authenticate them? She leaned back in her chair. We'd need access to the company's email server or David's personal computer. Anything that can verify these communications actually happened. I thought about Janet, about the risk she'd already taken. I might have a way, I said. Over the next week, Janet quietly copied every file she could find, emails, documents, meeting notes, anything that might prove David's scheme. She smuggled them out on flash drives hidden in her purse. It was dangerous. If David found out, she'd be fired immediately, possibly worse. But she kept going. Because, like she said, someone had to stop him. When we finally had everything we needed, my lawyer filed an amended motion with the court. This time, we weren't just claiming the will was forged. We were presenting evidence of a deliberate, premeditated conspiracy. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, David became increasingly paranoid. He started installing security cameras throughout the office. He began monitoring employee emails. He even hired a private investigator to follow people he suspected of disloyalty. Janet told me all of this through encrypted messages. She was terrified, but she was also determined. Your father deserves better than this, she said. I'm not backing down. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed. David sat with his lawyer, looking confident, smug, like he'd already won. My lawyer stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, we're presenting new evidence that demonstrates Mr. David Morgan engaged in a calculated conspiracy to defraud his brother and steal their father's estate. She handed the judge a binder. Inside were the emails, the forged will analysis, the timeline showing David had contacted the lawyer months before their father's death. The judge read through everything in silence. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Morgan, she said, her voice cold, can you explain these communications? David's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we haven't been provided with these documents in discovery. We request time to review and respond. The judge's expression hardened. These emails appear to originate from your client's own email account. Are you suggesting they're fabricated? The lawyer hesitated. We need time to verify their authenticity. Very well, the judge said. I'm ordering a forensic examination of Mr. David Morgan's email accounts and personal devices. We'll reconvene in 30 days. David's face went pale. For the first time, I saw him panic. Outside the courtroom, he cornered me in the hallway. You son of a bitch, he hissed. You hacked my emails. I didn't hack anything, I said calmly. But it's interesting that you're not denying what's in them. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. If you think you're going to win this, you're delusional. I'll bury you. I'll drag this out so long you'll go bankrupt from legal fees. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. The forensic examination took 3 weeks. The results were damning. Every email was authenticated. The metadata confirmed they'd been sent from David's accounts. The timeline matched perfectly with the creation of the forged will. The investigator also found deleted files on David's laptop, draft versions of the fake will, research on forgery techniques, instructions he'd saved on how to trace signatures. It was all there, every piece of evidence we needed. When the court reconvened, David's lawyer tried to argue that the emails were taken out of context, that David had simply been exploring his legal options, that there was no proof he'd actually forged anything. But the judge wasn't buying it. She held up the forensic report. Mr. Morgan, these files show clear intent to commit fraud. The deleted drafts on your computer match the forged will filed with this court. The emails show you conspired with an attorney to execute this plan months in advance." She paused. "I am revoking the fraudulent will. I am reinstating the original will as filed by your father. And I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." The gavel came down. David sat frozen in his chair. His lawyer tried to say something, but the judge had already stood and left the courtroom. I walked outside into the bright afternoon sun. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I just felt tired and sad, because this wasn't supposed to be how things ended. David and I had grown up together. We'd played on the same little league team. We'd gone to the same schools. We'd worked side by side in Dad's company for years. And now, because of greed, because of betrayal, because of choices he'd made, we were strangers. The criminal case moved slowly. David's lawyer tried every delay tactic in the book, but the evidence was overwhelming. Eventually, David agreed to a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. In exchange for avoiding prison time, he agreed to surrender all claims to the company, pay full restitution for my legal expenses, and accept 5 years of probation. The day he signed the plea agreement, I sat in the courtroom and watched him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. When the hearing ended, he walked past me without a word, just like before. And just like before, I didn't stop him. There was nothing left to say. Taking over the company was harder than I expected. David had done significant damage in the 6 months he'd been in control. He'd alienated key clients. He'd fired some of our best people. He'd made reckless financial decisions that put us in serious debt. I spent the first 3 months just trying to stop the bleeding. I reached out to former employees. Many of them came back. They'd left because of David, not because they didn't believe in the company. I apologized to clients, rebuilt trust, showed them we were still the same company my father had built, the company that kept its promises. Slowly, things started to turn around. We landed a major contract I thought we'd lost forever. We hired new talent. We paid down the debt. By the end of the first year, we were profitable again. By the end of the second year, we'd exceeded our pre-David revenue numbers. But the success felt hollow, because every time I sat in my father's office, I thought about how things were supposed to be. David and me, brothers, partners, building something together. Instead, I was alone. My mother struggled with what had happened. She blamed herself. She kept asking what she could have done differently, how she'd missed the signs. I told her over and over that this wasn't her fault, that David's choices were his own, but I don't think she ever fully believed me. She aged 10 years in the span of one. The stress, the heartbreak, the shame of having a son who'd done something so terrible. It broke something in her. Janet stayed with the company. I promoted her to Chief Operations Officer. She'd earned it. Without her courage, without her willingness to risk everything, David would have won. She became one of my most trusted advisors, and she never once asked for recognition or reward. She just kept working, kept helping, kept honoring my father's memory. I learned a lot from this experience. I learned that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the people closest to you. I learned that greed can turn a brother into a stranger. That ambition without integrity is just another word for corruption. And I learned that my father's greatest gift to me wasn't the company. It was the lesson to always be prepared, to always protect what matters, to always keep the truth somewhere safe, because you never know when you'll need it. The company is thriving now. We've expanded into new markets. We've hired hundreds of people. We've built projects my father would have been proud of. But every time I walk past his old workshop in my mother's garage, I think about that metal box behind the false panel, about the documents inside, about how close I came to losing everything. David and I haven't spoken since the plea hearing. I don't know if we ever will. Part of me hopes he's found peace, that he's learned from his mistakes, that he's become a better person. But another part of me knows that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep. Some wounds never fully heal. What I do know is this: if my father were here today, I think he'd be proud, not because I won, but because I fought, because I refused to let someone steal his legacy, because I honored the values he taught me. And that, more than any court victory, more than any financial success, is what matters most. If you've ever been in a situation like this, if you've ever had to fight a family member over what's rightfully yours, if you've ever discovered that someone you loved was capable of unthinkable betrayal, I want you to know something. You can survive it. You can rebuild. You can move forward. It won't be easy. It will hurt. It will change you. But you can come out the other side stronger, wiser, more resilient. And you'll know, without a doubt, who you can truly trust. Because in the end, that's what these experiences teach us. Not everyone deserves a place in your life. Not everyone has earned your trust. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to be better. My father's legacy lives on, not just in the company he built, but in the principles he lived by: integrity, honesty, loyalty, hard work. And those are things no one can forge, no one can steal, no one can take away. That's the real inheritance. And it's worth more than any business, any property, any amount of money. Have you ever been through something like this, or know someone who has? Tell us below, because betrayal by family is one of the deepest wounds a person can endure. And sometimes sharing our stories is the first step toward healing.